The blood on Kane Keller's boots had barely dried when he realized his cook had quit. The third one in as many months. And if he did not find someone willing to endure the harsh realities of ranch life soon, his entire crew would abandon him for spreads with better meals and warmer welcomes. The year was 1884, and in Clifton Hill, Missouri, good help was harder to find than water in a drought, especially when your reputation for being a hard man preceded you like a storm cloud. Kane stood on the porch of his sprawling ranch house, watching the dust settle from the departing wagon, his jaw clenched tight enough to crack teeth. He was 32 years old, built like an oak tree, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of a winter sky. His ranch, the Double K, stretched across 3,000 acres of rolling hills and grassland, supporting near about 500 head of cattle and a dozen horses that were the envy of every rancher within 100 miles. But none of that mattered if his men could not eat decent food. The cowboys who worked his land were already grumbling, threatening to ride out come spring if things did not improve. Kane had built this ranch from nothing after the war, every board and fence post representing backbreaking work and sacrifice. He would be damned if he lost it all because he could not keep a cook happy. He walked into town that afternoon, his horse kicking up clouds of red dust on the road. Clifton Hill was a modest settlement of perhaps 300 souls, with a main street lined by wooden storefronts, a saloon, a general store, a church, and the assorted businesses necessary to keep frontier life moving forward. Kane tied his horse outside the general store and pushed through the door, the bell jangling overhead. Martha Henderson, the proprietor's wife, looked up from her accounting ledger and gave him a cautious nod. "Afternoon, Kane. Martha, you hear of anyone looking for work?" "I need a cook and I need one quick." Martha pursed her lips, thinking, "Most folks who can cook already have positions. You might try posting a notice." "Already did. Nobody's answered." Kane removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "I am getting desperate here." "Well," Martha said slowly, "there is that girl who came in on the train yesterday. Foreign by the looks of her. She has been sitting at the station most of the day with nowhere to go." Kane's eyebrows rose. "Foreign how? Cannot speak a word of English, near as I can tell." "Dark hair. Pretty enough, I suppose, but looking lost as a lamb. Probably came thinking she had family here or work waiting. Happens sometimes with those immigrant groups." Kane considered this. A cook who could not speak English was not ideal, but beggars could not be choosers. "She's still at the station. Was an hour ago when I saw her." Kane thanked Martha and headed toward the small train depot at the edge of town. Sure enough, sitting on a bench with a worn carpet bag beside her was a young woman who looked entirely out of place in Missouri. She wore a simple dark dress that had seen better days, and her black hair was pulled back in a practical braid. When she looked up at his approach, Kane found himself staring into the deepest brown eyes he had ever seen, rich as creek-bottom soil and filled with an wariness that spoke of hard experience. He stopped a few feet away, suddenly uncertain how to proceed. She stood quickly, clutching her bag, and he noticed she was tiny compared to him, barely reaching his shoulder. He guessed she was in her early 20s, with delicate features that would have been lovely if they had not been pinched with worry and exhaustion. "Madam," he said, touching the brim of his hat, "I am Kane Keller. I run a ranch outside town." She stared at him blankly, and he could see she had not understood a single word. He tried again, slower, but her expression remained confused. Kane looked around, hoping for someone who might translate, but the station was empty except for the clerk, who had already disappeared into the back room. He pointed at himself. "Kane." Then he pointed at her questioningly, understanding flickered in her eyes. She pointed at herself. "Julietta." Her voice was soft, accented in a way he could not place, though he thought maybe Italian or Spanish. "Julietta," he repeated, and she nodded. He made a gesture like eating, bringing his hand to his mouth, then pointed at her and raised his eyebrows. "Can you cook?" She watched his pantomime with intense concentration. Then, slowly, she nodded and made her own cooking gestures, stirring an invisible pot. Yes, she could cook. Relief washed through him. He gestured for her to follow him, picking up her bag before she could protest. She hesitated only a moment before falling into step behind him, her head turning to take in the foreign landscape around her. Whatever had brought her to Clifton Hill, Missouri, she was clearly far from home, and Kane found himself wondering what her story was even as he led her toward his wagon. The ride back to the ranch was silent except for the creaking of wheels and the steady plod of horse hooves. Kane glanced sideways at Julietta several times, noting how she sat with her spine straight and her hands folded in her lap, taking in everything with those observant eyes. When the ranch house came into view, he saw her shoulders relax slightly. Perhaps the sight of something substantial, something that spoke of stability, eased her worries. The ranch house was a two-story structure he had built himself, solid timber with a wraparound porch and windows that caught the afternoon light. Behind it sprawled the bunkhouse, the barn, the corrals, and the various outbuildings necessary for running a cattle operation. His foreman, Tom Bradley, was walking from the barn when Kane pulled up. "Found a cook," Kane called out. "She does not speak English, but she knows her way around a kitchen, apparently." Tom's weathered face split in a grin. "Well, that is something at least. The boys will be relieved." Kane helped Julietta down from the wagon, her hand light in his for just a moment before she pulled away. He showed her into the house, through the front room with its simple furniture and stone fireplace, and into the large kitchen that dominated the back of the house. The previous cook had left it reasonably clean, though there were dishes stacked by the sink and the stove needed blacking. Julietta set down her bag and moved through the kitchen with purpose, opening cabinets, checking the pantry, examining the stove. Kane watched her, impressed by her efficiency. She might not speak his language, but she clearly knew what she was doing. He showed her to the small room off the kitchen that had been the cook's quarters. It was plain but serviceable, with a narrow bed, a dresser, and a window overlooking the side yard. Julietta turned to him and said something in her language, the words flowing like water. He could not understand the meaning, but the tone was grateful. "You are welcome," he said, knowing she would not understand but hoping his own tone conveyed the message. He pointed at her, then at the kitchen, then held up fingers. "Dinner, 6 o'clock." She nodded quickly, already moving back toward the kitchen. Kane left her to it, heading out to deal with the afternoon's work. He had cattle to check on and a fence line that needed mending, but his mind kept drifting back to the dark-eyed woman now inhabiting his kitchen. That evening, when he and his crew of 6 cowboys filed into the dining room, the smell that greeted them was nothing short of miraculous. Julietta had somehow transformed the basic supplies in the pantry into a feast. There was fresh bread, still warm from the oven, a rich stew thick with vegetables and beef, roasted potatoes with herbs he did not know he had, and a pie that made Tom Bradley actually moan when he tasted it. Julietta served the meal quietly, her eyes downcast, but Kane saw the small smile that curved her lips when the men praised the food enthusiastically, their words needing no translation. "Boss, you better keep this one," said Charlie, one of the younger hands. "I do not care if she speaks Martian. This is the best food I have had in a year," Kane nodded, watching Julietta retreat to the kitchen. "That is the plan." The days fell into a rhythm after that. Julietta rose before dawn to prepare breakfast for the crew. hearty meals of eggs, bacon, biscuits, and gravy that fueled them through long days of hard work. She kept the house cleaner than it had been in years, and somehow managed to prepare dinners that grew more impressive with each passing day. Kane found himself looking forward to meals not just for the food, but for the brief glimpses of her moving gracefully through the dining room, refilling coffee or bringing out fresh bread. Communication remained a challenge, but they developed their own language of gestures and expressions. When Kane needed to explain something about the household or what the men would need for the next day, he drew pictures or acted things out until Julietta's face cleared with understanding. She did the same, showing him her shopping list through drawings and holding up empty containers when supplies ran low. One evening, about 2 weeks after she arrived, Kane found himself alone in the kitchen after dinner. The crew had gone to the bunkhouse, and he had stayed behind to fix a squeaky door hinge. Julietta was washing dishes, her sleeves rolled up and her hair escaping its braid in soft tendrils around her face. He watched her for a moment, hammer in hand, and felt something shift in his chest. She glanced up and caught him staring. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she smiled, shy and tentative, and Kane felt his heart kick like a green broke horse. He cleared his throat and turned back to the door, but his hands were not quite steady as he worked. That night, lying in his bed upstairs, Kane admitted to himself that his new cook was becoming more than just an employee. He thought about her constantly, found excuses to be in the house during the day, and felt a ridiculous sense of satisfaction when she smiled at something he said, even though she could not understand his words. It was foolish, he told himself. He barely knew her. They could not even talk to each other properly. But the heart, it seemed, did not require words. Winter came early that year, sweeping down from the north with ice and snow that turned the ranch into a frozen landscape. Kane worried about the cattle, about keeping them fed and safe from wolves. The work became even more demanding, and he often came in after dark, exhausted and half frozen. Julietta always had hot food waiting, and she began bringing him coffee in the front room while he thawed by the fire. She would sit nearby, working on mending or knitting, her presence a quiet comfort. Sometimes she hummed while she worked, soft melodies from her homeland that made Kane's chest ache with an emotion he could not name. One particularly brutal night, Kane stumbled in late after rescuing a calf that had wandered away from its mother. He was soaked through and shivering, his fingers too numb to unbutton his coat. Julietta took one look at him and sprang into action, her face creased with concern. She helped him out of his wet clothes, wrapping him in blankets and pushing him toward the fire. She brought him hot soup and sat beside him, rubbing warmth back into his hands with her own. Their eyes met, and Kane saw something in her gaze that matched the feeling growing in his own heart. Slowly, giving her time to pull away, he reached up and touched her cheek. She leaned into his palm, her eyes fluttering closed, and Kane knew he was lost. "Julietta," he whispered, and she opened her eyes, looking at him with such tenderness that it stole his breath. She said something in her language, soft and sweet, and though he could not understand the words, he understood the meaning. She leaned forward, and Kane closed the distance between them, pressing his lips to hers in a kiss that felt like coming home. When they pulled apart, Julietta was blushing, but she was smiling too, wider than he had ever seen. Kane cupped her face in both hands and kissed her forehead, her cheeks, the tip of her nose making her laugh. The sound was like music. They sat by the fire for a long time that night, wrapped in blankets, not talking but not needing to. Kane held her hand and traced the delicate bones of her fingers, marveling that something so precious had wandered into his life. As Christmas approached, Kane decided he wanted to give Julietta something special. He rode into town and spent an hour at the general store, trying to explain to Martha Henderson what he needed. Finally, he settled on a length of deep blue fabric that matched the winter sky, soft and fine, enough to make a new dress. He also bought a silver locket, simple but pretty, and rode home feeling as nervous as a schoolboy. Christmas morning, he gave her the gifts wrapped in brown paper. Julietta's eyes went wide when she unfolded the fabric, running her hands over it with reverence. She said something that sounded like thanks, then threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tightly. Kane held her close, breathing in the scent of bread and herbs that always clung to her hair. When she opened the locket, tears spilled down her cheeks. She pressed it to her heart and said something long and heartfelt in her language. Kane wiped away her tears with his thumbs and kissed her gently. "I wish I knew what you were saying," he murmured. "I wish I could tell you properly how I feel about you." Julietta took his face in her hands and spoke slowly, emphasizing each word. "Ti amo." Kane did not know the language, but he knew what that meant. "I love you too," he said, and kissed her again. They spent that Christmas day together, cooking a feast for the ranch hands and exchanging small touches and secret smiles. The crew noticed, of course. It would have been impossible not to see the way Kane looked at Julietta, or how she bloomed under his attention. Tom Bradley pulled Kane aside in the afternoon. "You're serious about her, boss," Kane nodded. "I am. Cannot say I blame you. She is a fine woman, but you two cannot even talk to each other." "We talk just fine," Kane said quietly. "Maybe not with words, but we understand each other well enough." Tom clapped him on the shoulder. "Then I am happy for you. Lord knows you have been alone too long." That winter was the hardest Kane could remember, with blizzards that lasted days and temperatures that froze water in the troughs. But it was also the happiest, because every evening he came home to Julietta's warmth. They grew closer despite the language barrier, learning to communicate through touch and expression, and the universal language of affection. Julietta began teaching him words in her language, which he finally learned was Italian. She would point at objects and say their Italian names, then listen patiently while he butchered the pronunciation, laughing and correcting him until he got it right. In turn, he taught her English, writing out words and having her repeat them. She was a quick study, picking up new vocabulary every day. By February, she could cobble together simple sentences, and Kane felt like he had been given a precious gift every time she spoke to him in his own language. "The snow is very pretty," she said one morning, her accent thick but her words clear. "It is," Kane agreed, standing behind her at the window, his arms wrapped around her waist. "But I will be glad when spring comes." "Spring," she repeated, testing the word. She turned in his arms to face him. "Kane, I want to say something important." His heart beat faster. "All right." She took a deep breath, clearly working through the English words in her mind. "When I come here, I am very scared. No family, no money, nowhere to go. I think maybe I will die in this strange place." Her eyes glistened with tears. "But you save me. You give me home, give me work, give me." She touched his chest over his heart. "I love you very much, Kane Keller." Kane felt his own eyes sting. He had never been good with words, even in his own language, but he tried. "You saved me too, Julietta. This ranch, it was just a place I worked before you came. Now it is home. You made it home. I love you more than I can say." She stretched up on her toes and kissed him, and Kane poured everything he felt into that kiss. Every emotion he could not quite articulate, every dream he was beginning to let himself have. When spring finally broke, bringing green grass and wildflowers that covered the hills in waves of color, Kane knew what he wanted to do. He rode into town and spoke with Reverend Matthews, the circuit preacher who came through Clifton Hill once a month. Then he bought a ring from the jeweler, a simple gold band with a small diamond that had cost him 2 months' profit from the cattle sales. On a warm April evening, with the sun setting in streaks of gold and pink across the Missouri sky, Kane led Julietta out to the top of a hill overlooking the ranch. The land stretched out below them, cattle grazing peacefully, the ranch house and barn looking solid and permanent against the landscape. "Julietta," Kane began, then dropped to one knee, his hands shaking as he pulled out the ring. "I know we are from different worlds, and there is still a lot you do not understand about my words and I do not understand about yours, but none of that matters. What matters is how I feel when I am with you, how right it seems to have you beside me. Will you marry me? Will you be my wife?" Julietta's hands flew to her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Yes," she said, half laughing, half crying. "Yes, Kane, yes." She said something long and rapid in Italian, then switched back to English. "I will marry you. I want to marry you more than anything." Kane slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, sweeping her into his arms and spinning her around while she laughed and clung to his shoulders. When he set her down, they kissed with the setting sun painting everything in golden light, and Kane felt complete in a way he never had before. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Clifton Hill. Julietta wore a dress she had sewn herself from the blue fabric Kane had given her for Christmas, and she carried wildflowers from the hills. Kane wore his best suit and could not stop smiling as he watched her walk down the aisle toward him. Tom Bradley stood up with him, and Martha Henderson stood with Julietta, both of them beaming like proud parents. Reverend Matthews kept the service simple, and when he pronounced them man and wife, Kane kissed his bride with all the pent-up emotion of the past months. The small gathering of townspeople and ranch hands cheered, and someone started playing a fiddle as they emerged from the church into the bright May sunshine. They held a celebration at the ranch that evening, with tables set up in the yard and enough food to feed half the county. Julietta had been cooking for days, preparing dishes from her homeland that made everyone beg for recipes. There was music and dancing, and Kane waltzed his wife around the yard while the stars came out overhead, not caring that half the county was watching. Later, when the guests had finally left and they were alone in the ranch house, Kane carried Julietta upstairs to the bedroom they would now share. She had transformed it while he was out working during the weeks before the wedding, adding curtains and a new quilt, making it feel warm and welcoming. "Are you happy?" Kane asked, sitting on the edge of the bed with Julietta in his lap. She cupped his face in her hands, her English coming more confidently now. "I am more happy than I ever thought possible. When I left Italy, I thought my life was over. My family, they have no money to keep me, so I come to America hoping for work, for a new start. But I am so scared, Kane, so alone, and then you find me and you are so kind, so good." She kissed him softly. "You are my miracle." "No," Kane said, his voice rough with emotion. "You are mine." They made love that night with a tenderness that brought tears to both their eyes, a joining of not just bodies but souls that had found each other against impossible odds. Afterward, Kane held his wife close, stroking her hair and listening to her breathe, and thought about how empty his life had been before that day he had walked to the train station out of desperation. The years that followed were not always easy. Running a ranch never was, especially in the unpredictable climate of Missouri with its droughts and floods, its harsh winters and scorching summers. But Kane and Julietta faced every challenge together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing season. Julietta's English improved until she spoke with only a slight accent, and Kane picked up enough Italian that they sometimes conversed in a mixture of both languages, their own private dialect that belonged only to them. She became a fixture in Clifton Hill, known for her kindness and her generous spirit. When other immigrant families began arriving in the area, Julietta was there to welcome them, to help them adjust, to be the kind of friendly face she herself had found in Kane. A year after their wedding, Julietta told Kane she was expecting a child. He had been checking a fence line when she rode out to find him, something she rarely did, and his heart had leaped into his throat with worry that something was wrong. "Are you all right?" he asked, pulling her down from her horse and checking her over for injuries. "I am fine," she laughed, catching his hands. "Kane, stop, I am fine, I have news." "What news?" She took his hand and placed it on her stomach, her eyes shining. "We are going to have a baby." Kane stared at her, the words taking a moment to sink in. Then he whooped with joy and picked her up, spinning her carefully before setting her down and dropping to his knees. He pressed his face against her belly, overcome with emotion. "A baby," he whispered. "We are going to be parents." Julietta ran her fingers through his hair. "Are you happy?" He looked up at her, tears streaming down his weathered face. Happy does not even begin to cover it. Their son was born in February of 1886, during one of those brief warm spells that sometimes broke up Missouri winters. Kane paced outside the bedroom door while Martha Henderson attended to Julietta, terrified every time he heard his wife cry out. But when Martha finally emerged, smiling, and told him he had a healthy baby boy, Kane burst into the room to find Julietta exhausted but glowing, cradling a tiny bundle in her arms. "Meet your son," she said softly. Kane approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. The baby was impossibly small, with a shock of dark hair and a scrunched-up face that somehow already looked indignant at being brought into the cold world. When Kane reached out a tentative finger, the baby grabbed it with a surprisingly strong grip, and Kane felt his heart expand in a way he had not known was possible. "He is perfect," Kane breathed. "You are perfect. What should we name him?" They had discussed names for months, unable to agree. Julietta wanted an Italian name. Kane wanted something American, and they had debated and laughed and argued affectionately without reaching a conclusion. Now, looking at her son, Julietta said, "I think he looks like a Marco, but Marco Keller, American boy with Italian name." "Marco," Kane repeated, testing it. "Marco Keller, I like it." "Marco Kane Keller," Julietta amended, and Kane's eyes grew suspiciously bright. "That is a strong name for a strong boy." Their son thrived, growing from a tiny infant into a robust baby, and then a curious toddler who followed his father everywhere, chattering in a mix of English and Italian that charmed everyone who heard it. Kane discovered that being a father suited him, that he loved teaching his son about the ranch, about the land, about the values that mattered in life. 2 years after Marco's birth, Julietta gave Kane a daughter. They named her Sophia, and she had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin. Kane doted on her shamelessly, and his ranch hands teased him mercilessly about how the tough rancher melted into a puddle whenever his daughter smiled at him. Life on the Double K Ranch settled into a beautiful rhythm. The cattle operation prospered, growing until Kane had to hire more hands and expand the facilities. The ranch house echoed with children's laughter and Julietta's singing as she worked in her kitchen. Kane's reputation changed from that of a hard, solitary man to a family man, someone whose home was known for its warmth and welcome. On their 5th wedding anniversary, Kane and Julietta stood on the same hill where he had proposed, watching their children play in the grass below while the sun set in its familiar glory. "You ever regret it?" Kane asked quietly. "Leaving Italy, ending up here in the middle of nowhere, Missouri?" Julietta leaned against his side, his arm around her shoulders. "Never," she said firmly. "This is my home now. You are my home. These children, this land, this life we have built together. How could I regret any of it? I just know it must be hard sometimes, being so far from where you grew up, from your family." "It was hard at first," Julietta admitted. "I missed my mother, my sisters. I missed the food, the language, the familiar things. But Kane, you gave me a new family. A better family, because we chose each other. And my children, they will grow up here in this free place with opportunities I never had in Italy. That is worth everything." Kane kissed the top of her head. "I think about that day at the train station sometimes. What if I had not been desperate enough to hire someone who could not speak English? What if Martha had not mentioned you? What if you had been too afraid to come with me?" "But none of those things happened," Julietta said. "We found each other, Kane. That is all that matters. You are right." Kane watched Marco trying to show Sophia how to make a whistle from a blade of grass, the little girl watching her brother with adoring eyes. "Although I will say, our inability to talk to each other certainly made courting interesting." Julietta laughed. "You were very creative with your gestures. I remember thinking you looked so serious and determined, trying to explain things to me. It was sweet." "Sweet?" Kane raised an eyebrow. "I was terrified half the time that I was going to offend you somehow and you would leave." "I had nowhere else to go," Julietta pointed out. "But even if I had, I would have stayed. Even in those first few days, I felt safe with you. You looked so rough and tough, but you were gentle with me. You made me feel valued. You were valuable, are valuable." Kane turned her to face him. "You are the most valuable thing in my life, Julietta. You and our children. This ranch, all of it, it means nothing without you." She reached up and kissed him, slow and sweet. "I love you, Kane Keller." "I love you too, Julietta Keller." They walked down the hill together as twilight deepened, calling their children to come inside. Marco ran ahead, but Sophia demanded that her father carry her, and Kane swept her up onto his shoulders, making her squeal with delight. Julietta walked beside them, her hand in Kane's free hand, and felt the deep contentment of a life well lived. As the years continued to pass, the ranch became even more prosperous. Kane made smart decisions about breeding stock and land management, and his reputation as a fair employer and honest dealer spread throughout the region. Young cowboys sought work at the Double K, knowing they would be treated well and paid fairly. Kane often credited his success to Julietta, pointing out that happy, well-fed workers were productive workers, and nobody fed a crew better than his wife. Julietta herself became something of a legend in Clifton Hill. She helped establish a small school where immigrant children could learn English while still maintaining their native languages. She taught cooking classes, sharing her Italian recipes with curious Missouri housewives, and learning their traditional dishes in return. When influenza swept through the area one terrible winter, Julietta worked tirelessly nursing the sick, her kitchen constantly producing nourishing broths and remedies. Kane watched her in awe, this woman who had arrived in Missouri with nothing but a carpetbag and a language barrier, who had built herself into a pillar of the community through sheer force of will and genuine kindness. Marco grew into a capable young man who loved the ranch as much as his father did. By the time he was 16, he was essentially Kane's right-hand man, able to handle most aspects of the operation independently. He had his mother's quick mind and his father's steady temperament, and Kane felt confident that the Double K would be in good hands when the time came to pass it on. Sophia, meanwhile, surprised everyone by developing a passion for horses. She could ride before she could properly raid, and by age 12, she was breaking and training horses with a skill that impressed even the most experienced cowboys. Kane built her a separate stable for her breeding program, and Sophia's horses began winning prizes at regional fairs and fetching premium prices from buyers across several states. In 1896, as Kane approached 44 and Julietta turned 37, they welcomed a surprise late addition to their family. Another son, whom they named Vincent, arrived during a spring thunderstorm, his first cries mixing with the rumble of thunder. Marco and Sophia, now 16 and 14 respectively, were enchanted with their baby brother, fighting over who got to hold him and help care for him. "We are starting over," Kane said, cradling his tiny son in his large, work-roughened hands. Julietta, recovered and radiant despite the exhaustion of childbirth, smiled. "We are blessed," she corrected. "Again and again we are blessed. Life was not without its sorrows. Tom Bradley, Kane's loyal foreman and friend, died of a heart attack while checking on the herd one summer day. Kane wept at his funeral, one of the few times his children ever saw their father cry. Julietta's mother passed away in Italy, and though Julietta had not seen her in nearly 2 decades, she grieved deeply for months. There were business setbacks, droughts that tested their reserves, a barn fire that destroyed valuable equipment. But through every hardship, Kane and Julietta faced the challenge together, their partnership unshakable. They had learned early that communication went deeper than language, that love was built on trust, respect, and commitment rather than just words. The language barrier that had marked the beginning of their relationship became a story they told their children, a reminder that the most important things in life often transcended simple explanation. As the new century dawned, bringing with it incredible changes and modernization, the Double K Ranch stood as a testament to what hard work and enduring love could build. Kane, now silver-haired but still strong, would walk the property with Julietta in the evenings, just as they had done since their courting days. "You remember when we could not understand a word each other said?" Julietta would ask, squeezing his hand. "I understood everything that mattered," Kane would reply. "I understood you were special from the first moment I saw you at that train station. You looked so fierce," Julietta remembered. "I was frightened at first, but then I saw your eyes, kind eyes. You looked like you needed help." "I needed help. It seemed like fate." "It was fate," Julietta said firmly. "God brought me across an ocean to find you, Kane Keller. He brought me to that little train station in Missouri at exactly the right moment for you to find me. How can that be anything but fate?" Kane could not argue with that logic, and he did not try. Marco married a local girl in 1903, a sweet-tempered young woman named Helen who fit into the family perfectly. They built a house on the north section of the ranch and began their own family, presenting Kane and Julietta with grandchildren who called them Nana and Pap. Sophia married a horse breeder from Kentucky, a match that made perfect sense given her passion, and though she moved away, she visited frequently and always stayed for extended periods. Vincent grew up adored by his entire family, a happy child who showed signs of having inherited both his mother's culinary talents and his father's business sense. He talked of opening a restaurant someday, maybe in St. Louis, that would serve his mother's Italian recipes to a wider audience. In 1910, Kane and Julietta celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a party that brought together friends and family from across Missouri and beyond. The celebration was held at the ranch, with tables set up across the yard and enough food to feed everyone twice over. There was music and dancing and speeches that made both Kane and Julietta tear up. Marco stood to toast his parents, raising his glass high. "To my father and mother, who proved that love does not need words, only heart." They came from different worlds but built a new world together, one that welcomed all of us. He gestured to the assembled crowd, his own children, his sister and her family, the ranch hands both old and new, the townspeople who had become friends. This place, this family, it is their legacy. And it is built on the foundation of their love for each other. Everyone cheered and drank, and Kane pulled Julietta close, kissing her in front of everyone just as he had on their wedding day 25 years earlier. 25 years, he murmured against her hair. How did we get so lucky? We did not get lucky, Julietta corrected, as she always did. We were blessed, and we worked hard. Love is not just luck, Kane, it is choice and effort and forgiveness and patience. You are right, as always, Kane conceded, but I still say I am the luckiest man alive to have found you. They danced that night under strings of lanterns that turned the yard into something magical. Julietta's hair was silver now, threaded through the black, and Kane's face bore the deep lines of a life spent outdoors. But in each other's eyes, they saw the young people they had been when they met, the rancher desperate for help and the lost immigrant girl with nowhere else to go. The Double K Ranch continued to prosper under Marco's increasing involvement in its management, allowing Kane to step back and spend more time with Julietta. They traveled a bit, taking a train to New York City to see where Julietta had first entered America, and even managing a trip to Italy in 1912, so Julietta could reconnect with her surviving siblings and show Kane the village where she had been born. Standing in the small Italian town, Kane tried to imagine his wife as a girl growing up in these narrow streets, speaking only Italian, never dreaming she would end up on a Missouri ranch. It seemed impossible, the chain of events that had brought them together. "What are you thinking?" Julietta asked, linking her arm through his as they walked. "I am thinking about miracles," Kane said honestly. "About how many things had to go exactly right for us to find each other. If your family had not sent you to America, if you had gone to a different town, if I had not needed a cook that exact week, if Martha had not mentioned you, if you had been too frightened to come with me. Any one of those things goes differently, and we never meet. Then I am grateful for every single choice and chance that led us to each other," Julietta said. "Even the hard ones. Even being so poor my family could not feed me. Even being so desperate I got on a boat to a country where I did not speak the language. All of it was worth it to find you, to build the life we have." Kane stopped walking and pulled her close, right there in the middle of the Italian street where she had been born. "I love you, Julietta Keller, more today than yesterday, less than tomorrow." "That is very poetic for a rancher," she teased, but her eyes were bright with tears. "I learned from the best," he said, and kissed her while curious Italian villagers smiled and murmured approvingly at the sight of the American couple so obviously in love. They returned to Missouri renewed, grateful for the journey but happy to be home. That is what the Double K had become for Julietta, Kane realized. Not just a place where she lived and worked, but truly home, as much or more than the Italian village of her birth. As they aged into their 60s, Kane and Julietta settled into a comfortable rhythm. They rose early out of habit, even though they no longer had to. They took long walks around the property, watching Marco and his family continue the ranch's traditions. They spoiled their grandchildren shamelessly, teaching them Italian songs and stories about the old days. They sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over land they had built their lives upon. "You remember the first meal you cooked for me?" Kane asked one evening, the summer heat finally breaking into pleasant coolness. Julietta laughed. "I was so nervous. I had no idea what Americans like to eat. I just made what I knew how to make and hoped it would be acceptable. It was more than acceptable. It was the best food I had ever tasted. The men talked about that dinner for weeks. They were just hungry," Julietta said modestly, No, they were amazed. Same as I was amazed by you, still am amazed by you every single day. Julietta squeezed his hand. We have had a good life, Kane Keller. The best life, Kane agreed. Better than I ever imagined possible. You know what I think about sometimes? Julietta asked. I think about that girl sitting at the train station, so scared and alone. I wish I could go back and tell her everything would be all right, better than all right. That she would find love and family and purpose, that she would be happy. I think about that too, Kane admitted. About the man I was before you, so closed off and angry at the world. You opened me up, Julietta. You taught me how to love, how to be part of something bigger than myself. We taught each other, Julietta said firmly. That is what marriage is. Teaching each other, learning together, growing together. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear one by one across the darkening sky. Inside the house, they could hear Vincent moving around, preparing dinner. He had decided to postpone his restaurant dreams to help manage the ranch, at least for a few more years, and his cooking had become legendary in the area, a perfect blend of his mother's Italian traditions and his own innovations. I think we did all right, Kane said eventually. With the children, with the ranch, with everything. We did better than all right, Julietta corrected. We built something lasting, Kane, something that will continue long after we are gone. Our children, our grandchildren, they carry our love forward into the future. Kane nodded, emotion thick in his throat. He was not a man given to sentimentality, but age and the deepening awareness of mortality made him reflective. I just want you to know, he said gruffly, that you are the best thing that ever happened to me. The very best thing. Julietta turned to him, her face still beautiful despite the years, her dark eyes still able to see straight into his soul just as they had that first day at the train station. And you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You saved my life, Kane Keller. Not just by giving me a job and a home, but by loving me, by seeing me when I felt invisible, by making me feel valuable when I felt worthless. You were never worthless, Kane said fiercely. Never. I know that now, Julietta said softly. Because of you, you taught me my own worth. They kissed, soft and sweet. A kiss that held 40 years of partnership, of challenges overcome and joys shared, of a love that had needed no translation from the very beginning. The years continued their relentless march forward. Kane and Julietta grew older, their steps slower, their bodies bearing the weight of hard lives well lived. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened, becoming richer and more complex with each passing season. In 1920, as Kane approached 70 and Julietta was 60, they sat together in the parlor on a winter evening. Snow fell softly outside, covering the ranch in white silence. Their children and grandchildren had visited for Christmas, filling the house with noise and laughter, but had left that morning, returning to their own lives and homes. It is quiet without them, Julietta observed, knitting a blanket for the newest great-grandchild expected in spring. Too quiet, Kane agreed. He sat by the fire, a book open in his lap though he was not really reading. But we will see them again soon. Marco said they would come for Sunday dinner. That is good, Julietta said. She set down her knitting and looked at her husband of 35 years. Kane, I need to tell you something. Something in her tone made him set aside his book and give her his full attention. What is it? I have been feeling tired lately, more than just old age tired, and there is a pain here. She touched her chest. I saw the doctor in town last week when I went for supplies. Kane's heart began to race. What did he say? My heart is weak, Julietta said calmly, though her hands trembled slightly. He says it could go on for years or it could happen tomorrow. There is no way to know. Kane crossed to her chair and knelt beside it, taking her hands in his. We will get you to a specialist in St. Louis or even Chicago. Better doctors, better treatments. Kane, Julietta said gently, cupping his face. I am 60 years old. I have lived a long, beautiful life. When my time comes, I am ready. Well, I am not ready, Kane said, his voice breaking. I am not ready to lose you, Julietta. I cannot do this without you. You will not have to do it without me for a long time yet, she reassured him. The doctor said I could live for many more years. I just wanted you to know so there are no secrets between us. Kane pulled her into his arms, holding her as tightly as he dared. You are my whole world, he whispered. My whole world, Julietta. And you are mine, she whispered back. But we have built something bigger than just us, Kane. Our family, our legacy, it goes on. That is the beautiful thing about love. It does not end. It continues generation after generation. Kane nodded against her shoulder, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. They stayed like that for a long time, holding each other while the fire crackled and the snow fell outside. But Julietta was tougher than any doctor predicted. She lived 5 more years, remaining active and engaged despite her weakening heart. She saw 3 more great-grandchildren born. She celebrated her 65th birthday with a party that rivaled their anniversary celebrations. She taught her granddaughters her secret recipes, passing down culinary knowledge that had traveled across an ocean and through decades. In the spring of 1925, on a mild April morning, Julietta woke early and made breakfast as she had done thousands of times before. Kane found her in the kitchen, humming one of her Italian songs, and wrapped his arms around her from behind. Good morning, my love, he murmured into her hair. Good morning, she replied, leaning back against him. It is a beautiful day. It is, Kane agreed, looking out the window at the ranch waking up to spring. Want to take a walk after breakfast, up to our hill? I would love that, Julietta said, turning in his arms to kiss him. They ate a leisurely breakfast, just the two of them, talking about nothing and everything. Then they walked hand in hand up the hill where Kane had proposed 40 years earlier, where they had stood on their anniversary, where they had watched their children play and dreamed their dreams. At the top, they stood looking out over the ranch, taking in the familiar view. The land was green with spring growth. Cattle dotted the pastures, and the buildings stood solid and well-maintained. Smoke rose from the chimney of Marco's house, and they could see tiny figures moving around the yard. We built something good, Julietta said softly. We built something wonderful, Kane corrected, his arm around her shoulders. Julietta leaned her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Kane, I want you to promise me something. Anything. When I am gone, I want you to keep living. Really living, not just going through the motions. Spend time with our children and grandchildren. Tell them stories about us. Keep making this ranch the warm, welcoming place we built together. Julietta, Kane protested, but she put her fingers over his lips. Promise me, she insisted. Promise me you will not close yourself off the way you were when I met you. Promise me you will stay open, stay loving, stay connected to our family. Kane looked down at her, this woman who had been his partner for 40 years, his best friend, his great love. I promise, he said, his voice rough. But you are not going anywhere anytime soon, so it is a pointless promise. Julietta smiled. I hope you are right. They stood there for a long time, just holding each other and watching the land they loved. When they finally walked back down the hill, Julietta's steps were slow, and she held Kane's arm more tightly than usual. But she was smiling, her face peaceful and content. That night after dinner, Julietta fell asleep in her chair by the fire. Kane, reading in his own chair, looked over and smiled at the sight of her peaceful face. When he reached over to wake her an hour later, ready to go to bed, he realized she was not sleeping. Her heart, weakened by years and finally ready to rest, had simply stopped. Kane held her and wept, crying out his grief to the empty house. His children came, his grandchildren, all of them surrounding him with love and support. They buried Julietta in the family cemetery on the ranch, on a hillside where she had a view of the land she had made home. The grief nearly broke him, but Kane remembered his promise. He kept going, kept living, kept the ranch running with Marco's capable help. He spent time with his family, telling and retelling the story of how he had met their mother, their grandmother, their great-grandmother. How he had been desperate for a cook and found the love of his life instead. How they had overcome a language barrier and cultural differences, and every obstacle life threw at them through sheer determination and love. He showed them the hill where he had proposed, the kitchen where Julietta had cooked thousands of meals, the room where their children had been born. He made sure everyone knew the story, made sure the legacy of their love was preserved. Kane lived 3 more years, staying active and engaged just as he had promised. He finally passed away peacefully in his sleep in 1928, at the age of 76. His children buried him beside Julietta, their graves marked with simple stones that bore their names and a single inscription that Marco chose. Love needs no translation. The Double K Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through the family, each new generation learning the story of Kane and Julietta. Their great-great-grandchildren would stand on that same hill and hear about the rancher who hired a cook who could not speak English and how they fell in love anyway. The story became family legend, then local history, a reminder that love, true love, transcends words and borders and circumstances. In the years that followed, as the world changed and modernized in ways Kane and Julietta could never have imagined, their story remained constant. It reminded people that the most important things, love and family and partnership, never really changed. That 2 people from completely different worlds could find each other and build something beautiful together. The ranch house still stood, modified and updated but fundamentally the same. Julietta's recipes were still used, passed down through generations, her culinary legacy enduring. The values Kane and Julietta had instilled in their children, hard work, kindness, welcoming strangers, standing by your word, continued to guide the family decades after they were gone. Visitors to Clifton Hill could see the old ranch from the road, still operating, still prosperous. Sometimes on quiet evenings, when the sun set in gold and pink streaks across the Missouri sky, people swore they could see 2 figures standing on the hill overlooking the property, holding hands and watching over the land they loved. It was probably just a trick of the light, shadows and wishful thinking. But the people who knew the story liked to think it was Kane and Julietta, still together as they had always been, still watching over the family and home they had built together from nothing but determination, faith, and a love that needed no translation. Their story lived on, told and retold, a testament to the power of love to overcome any obstacle, to bridge any divide, to create something lasting and beautiful from the most unlikely beginnings. A rancher and a cook who could not speak to each other had somehow understood everything that mattered, and in doing so, they had created a legacy that would endure far beyond their own lifetimes. And in the end, that was what they had both wanted. Not wealth or fame, but simply to love and be loved, to build a family and a home, to leave the world a little better than they found it. By that measure, Kane and Julietta Keller had succeeded beyond anyone's wildest dreams, their love story becoming the foundation for generations of happiness and prosperity. The Double K Ranch stood as their monument, but their true legacy was written in the hearts of their descendants, in every act of kindness, Every moment of understanding, every time someone chose love over fear, connection over isolation. Kane and Julietta had shown that it was possible, that love could conquer all, even the most fundamental of barriers. And their story, told in the warm kitchen of the ranch house or on the hilltop where they had shared so many moments, continued to inspire everyone who heard it to believe in the transformative power of love.